The question was shaped like concern, but carried the weight of a verdict. It lingered in a penthouse office above a city that fed on status, polished marble, and rumors. A child hid behind a desk that had hosted mergers and farewells, small shoulders quaking in a rhythm adults could not decode. In the middle of that echoing room stood a man in a maintenance uniform, steady as a metronome, holding nothing more threatening than a folded towel and a pocket-sized book with softened corners. Everyone else wore certainty like armor. He wore quiet. The building knew his schedule, his gait, his habit of checking every lock twice. Few knew the night classes, the bookmarked journals, the ritual of handwritten notes taken at a kitchen table near a window that looked out over Queens. He carried a name no one bothered to learn when they summoned the janitor on a service app. Caleb Mason, 34, three jobs stitched together so precisely that missing one train could unravel his entire month. He kept promises with an almost stubborn sincerity, even the small ones made only to himself. Read one article before bed, save $20 a week, be kind, even when it isn't returned. Power hovered in the room in tailored neutrality. Eleanor Pierce, chair of a global holdings firm, unmarried by choice, mother by vow, had run out of answers that looked good on paper. 6-year-old Lila had outlasted 17 nannies, 3 security firms, and the city's best-paid child whisperers. The nights had become a series of detonations. The mornings were cautious treaties that never held. Eleanor measured life in metrics and deliverables. This was a geography beyond her maps. The city's social conscience, or the imitation of one, arrived in perfume and skepticism. Genevieve Carrington had mastered the art of making alarms sound like benevolence. Her words, lacquered in etiquette, turned a man into a liability before he'd said a single sentence. She had perfected an old game, confused proximity to wealth with moral authority. The building listened. People always listen when certainty dresses well. What no one expected was the child's breathing to soften when the man in uniform lowered himself to the floor, placed the little book within sight, and remained there with the patience of someone who refused to measure another person's pain by the clock. It wasn't technique so much as reverence. He treated the silence like a language, and because he did, it began to speak back. The office, accustomed to negotiations, witnessed a much rarer agreement, fear loosening its grip, one unclenched second at a time. Rumor does not need proof to travel. It slid through private clubs and group chats with monogrammed avatars. It showed up as raised eyebrows over citrus salads and as thoughtful sighs that pretended to be warnings. "It's not appropriate," floated over a mahogany bar. "One cannot be too careful," echoed in a chauffeured backseat. What traveled with rumor was not truth, but permission. Permission to reduce a life to a role to a stereotype to a cautionary tale. Caleb's days became a quiet cadence of arrival, floor sitting, small games constructed from nothing, and notes written in a fine, deliberate hand. He noticed how Lila froze at the sound of closing doors and steadied when footsteps approached from her left rather than her right. He saw the child's eyes scan for escape even in rooms with open windows. He tracked her progress not in smiles per hour, but in breaths held and breaths released. He never tried to fix her. He tried to meet her where fear had built a home and offer a softer room across the hall. Beneath the uniform was a history the city had ignored. Before the accusations, there had been a lab coat and lectures, a fellowship citation framed by a landlord who refused to raise the rent because good work should have good neighbors. Before the uniform, there had been a small office in Boston with a waiting room full of Lego towers and mothers who exhaled their dread into coats that never lost the faint smell of winter. Before the uniform, there had been a case he would not bend, a report he would not falsify, a refusal that cost him his profession. The Drakes had offered money, then leverage, then threats wrapped in deference. He had refused each in turn. The lie they wanted was simple, the damage it would cause immeasurable. When they realized his no was not a bargaining position, they turned the machinery of influence the way one turns a key. His name left the conference circuit and entered gossip columns. His colleagues took calls that began with concern and ended with distance. The walls moved in. The floor gave way. He learned what many before him had learned, and too few after him, will be spared from learning. When reputation falls, truth must travel with receipts. He saved everything. Emails that began with gratitude and ended with warnings. Meeting summaries that were strangely identical from different writers. An apology whispered in a hallway when no one was listening, captured by a device designed for lectures, not survival. He left Boston with 2 suitcases, one of clothes and one of evidence. New York asked different things. It asked for anonymity, for endurance, for the humility to start at the bottom without losing one's belief in the top. He cleaned other people's hurried mistakes and taught himself to navigate a city that makes mercy optional. He kept his tools in 2 kits, one for floors and glass, one for minds and grief. He kept both close. As Lila's storm shortened, the whispers sharpened. The city's well-lit salons agreed that a boundary had been crossed. They scolded in the conditional tense, which is how the powerful avoid accountability. What if? Suppose that. Imagine should. They did not imagine the courage required to try again with a child who had already decided the world was not safe. They imagined only the optics of a man in a uniform occupying a space meant for consultants and curated smiles. Caleb's apartment became an archive. A banker's box labeled Pierce Progress held date-stamped notes of Lila's rituals and releases. A thin red folder labeled Countermeasures held screenshots, public statements whispered in private, records of interference that mistook itself for concern. A navy binder labeled Boston Legacy held the old life in pages that no longer made him tremble. He did not plan a war. He prepared a mirror. People who believe their influence is infinite prefer to meet where the skyline agrees with them. The dinner arrived like theater, a view that made the park look curated, crystal that knew how to catch the light, a table where the only mess allowed was caviar. The guests wore decades of practice at being obeyed. They expected a confession of error and a return to the order that had protected them from consequences. They did not expect a maintenance man to enter in an unassuming suit, set a briefcase on the table with the same care he used for a child's drawing, and rearrange the furniture of the room without touching a chair. He offered no speeches and invited no pity. He presented time, a timeline of a child's recovery, annotated not with adjectives but with patterns and thresholds crossed. The numbers did not care for opinion. He presented context. Peer-reviewed work, long before his name left hospital directories and entered rumor mills. He presented history, a documented conspiracy that bore a Boston address and a family name the guest knew too well. He presented corroboration, a respected neuropsychologist on a screen whose credentials made excuses look small. He presented choice. He could have chosen fire. He could have pursued public ruin for private relief, sued with a ferocity that made apologies come late and costly. He chose contour instead. He drew a line from harm to responsibility, from prejudice to repair. He labeled it plainly, restitution, not revenge. The terms were not performative. They were mathematics. A center that would not be a boutique clinic, but a citadel for children whose injuries did not come with billing codes robust enough to attract philanthropy. A model that would not trade dignity for access. Fees scaled by means, not by desperation. A staff who had survived their own storms, properly paid. A board that understood its duty as a promise, not a photo opportunity. A covenant that the people who had leveraged rumor to block a child's relief would now leverage their resources to build relief for 1,000 children they would never meet. Checks, when signed by hands unused to writing anything but signatures, can tremble. Their owners often mistake generosity for discipline. That night, they learned the difference. Accountability left the room in discreet envelopes and returned the next morning as wire confirmations and a quiet email from a law firm that had done this sort of settlement so many times they no longer pretended it was unusual. The transformation did not ask for permission to begin. It started in a lobby, in a building with ordinary glass and extraordinary purpose. The name on the wall was simple and unembellished. The Mason Institute for Child Resilience. The first day smelled like paint and optimism. A child stood at the threshold and asked if this place had loud doors. A therapist answered that the doors here learned to listen first. A mother cried without apology in a break room that stocked tea and tissues with the same respect. A city that sells noise learned to make quiet. Genevieve Carrington practiced a new script where contrition masqueraded as leadership. The city granted her a season of polite exile. Her invitations acquired a delay. Her advice lost gravity. She discovered a truth the powerful rarely admit. Influence is not a birthright. It is a loan with terms that can change without notice. The other doyens of her circle adjusted faster. They learned how to applaud what they had once opposed and how to stand for photographs whose captions contained their names beside a man they had refused to call by his. Eleanor Pierce found that competence, when met with honesty, becomes relief. She did not stop being a CEO at the door of the new clinic. She learned to be a mother differently once inside. She tracked progress in the same way she tracked markets, not in daily volatility, but in trends that prove the system is working. Her daughter ran in hallways with other children who no longer measured a room by its threats. Their laughter was not therapy. It was victory's accent. The city noticed. A newspaper wrote the kind of profile that begins with disbelief and ends with a vocabulary borrowed from grace. Academics reached for citations. University panels, once closed to a name tangled with controversy, opened with waiting lists and stipends. None of that moved Caleb as much as the quiet things did. A child who asked for water at a desk for the first time, a hallway quieting when a footstep matched a practiced rhythm, a small hand placing a sticker on a calendar square that used to represent a battlefield. 6 months altered the horizon. Then a year attached evidence to hope. The model traveled faster than rumor ever had. Cities that share a coastline share ideas. So do children who learn together that fear does not get to be the loudest voice in the room. Therapists from clinics in Detroit, Tulsa, and Oakland came to borrow protocols and left behind their own innovations. A manual with margins for local wisdom replaced a script that had never fit in the first place. The old case from Boston completed its arc. The public apology arrived with a signature that looked smaller than it used to. It admitted what it had never intended to say aloud. It could not restore the years. It acknowledged the theft. Caleb read it once, then placed it in the navy binder with the others. He did not frame it. He did not celebrate it. He acknowledged it the way one acknowledges a storm that has finally moved off the map. The city tried to propose awards. He agreed only to the ones that raised money for the clinic or brokered partnerships that would outlive the news cycle. He declined a book deal and said yes to a research grant that would make it easier for a clinic in a small town to hire its first trauma specialist. He remained suspicious of rooms where praise echoed too long. He preferred rooms where children relearned their own names. Glamour once tried to colonize the story. It asked for angles and arcs and a hero's journey that fits neatly into panels before dinner is served. The story would not cooperate. It refused to erase the harm that had been done to make room for a neat redemption. It insisted on the slow parts. The week where a child regressed and the staff learned not to call it failure. The month when a family missed every Tuesday and then arrived on Wednesday as if the calendar could be forgiven. The morning when a new therapist cried in a stairwell because a case reminded her of herself and a colleague brought her water and said nothing, and that, too, was part of the work. Justice, when it is real, does not roar for long. It settles. It becomes policy and payroll, and a line item for toys that do not break easily. It is doors that do not slam, and if they do, a maintenance plan that fixes them the same day. It is a scholarship fund named not for the donors, but for a cafeteria worker who insisted every child get seconds. It is the quiet way a board chair, yes, the same, shows up for the 6 a.m. fire drill and holds flashlights while the night custodian laughs and says the batteries were fine all along. Caleb's office has 2 windows. One faces a busy avenue where taxis practice impatience. One faces an air shaft where a single valiant fern refuses to die. On the shelf behind his desk is a row of binders, neatly labeled. Progress, countermeasures, legacy. New ones have appeared. Partnerships, protocols, stories. The last is for the letters he keeps, crayon declarations and careful cursive that say thank you without saying his name, because the children have learned that their healing belongs to them, not to his biography. On a Sunday, he walks with Lila and Eleanor through a park that forgives even the proudest buildings. The child points out dogs with jobs, joggers with headphones, a bench that always seems to be waiting. She has a scar the world can't see and a stamina the world can. She runs ahead and returns, a pendulum finding its center. The city presses in, louder than anyone's story, and yet inside the motion, there is a pocket of stillness where a different kind of wealth keeps score. Mornings without panic, afternoons with friends, evenings where sleep arrives like a trusted guest rather than a trespasser. People still confuse power with noise. They expect justice to bang a gavel. Sometimes it does. More often it looks like payroll submitted on time so the staff can breathe. Like fresh fruit in a waiting room where hunger is not the only thing a child brings to an appointment. Like a landlord who doesn't raise the rent because he sat in that lobby one day and realized the building he owns is part of something he cannot improve by being greedy. As for Genevieve, the city taught her a rare lesson: absence. The tables where her opinions used to land with authority began to wobble without her realizing why. Her name remained on a plaque in a gallery that learned how to program better. She discovered how quickly a platform becomes a step stool when you mistake it for bedrock. She still attends galas. Fewer cameras find her. She still speaks about duty. More ears carve her words into anecdotes rather than instructions. She learned late that the most expensive loss is relevance. The Institute's lobby gets a new bench on a Thursday. It is plain, sturdy, beautiful in the way a good tool is beautiful. Underneath it, discrete metal letters carry a single sentence. When you underestimate a person, you miscalculate a future. No donor list. No naming rights. Just a sentence that belongs to anyone who needs to read it. Children trace the letters with fingertips sticky from lollipops. Parents sit and do not bounce a knee quite as much. Staff rest there between appointments and remember why they came. The bench holds weight without complaint. It is the right metaphor. Caleb still carries the little book with softened corners, not as a trick or a credential, but as a reminder that all beginnings deserve something gentle. Sometimes he takes it out for a new child, not because it will work, but because it says, without saying, that stories can be entered anywhere and still carry you somewhere kinder. He does not think of victory the way a headline does. He thinks of continuance. He thinks of how easily progress can be unmade by budget cuts and fatigue and cynicism disguised as wisdom. He builds systems to outlast mood. He hires people who have learned to bend without breaking. He keeps two kits close, one for floors and glass, one for minds and grief, because both kinds of cleaning matter. If there is a moral, it is not offered as a scold, but as a map. Dignity is not charity, it is infrastructure. Build it into the doorway, the payroll, the schedule, the way a receptionist says a child's name. Build it into the policy that prevents a rumor from outranking a record. Build it into the courage it takes to admit that what you tried did not work, and to try again without shame. If there is a warning, it is simple. Prejudice is not just cruel, it is expensive. It wastes talent, time, and lives. It turns bright rooms into courtrooms, progress into apology tours, children's years into timelines of avoidable pain. And if there is a promise, it is this: the quiet power you overlook today may be the hand that steadies your world tomorrow. The city remembers better than it pretends to. It will forget the speeches and keep the schedules. It will forget the outrage and keep the outcomes. Somewhere, a child who once counted exits now counts friends. Somewhere, a board that once feared optics now funds oxygen. Somewhere, a man who was asked to mop up the aftermath of other people's certainty holds a door while a family steps into a different kind of future. This is how justice sometimes arrives, without thunder, with keys that open rooms where fear is not in charge, with receipts, yes, but also with rituals. Tea poured, doors softened, names learned, laughter permitted to be loud, with a bench that holds, with a book whose corners are soft because hands, small and fierce, have held it enough times to prove that beginnings can be gentle and still lead to strength. And if you need a final measure, take this one. They tried to make the man smaller than the rumor. The rumor shrank. The man did not.